Yes, in other parts of Boston near downtown, Chinatown and some adjacent areas have drawn a good deal of interest from developers. In the near future, that will mean new housing units and some economic growth. But there's concern about how the new development will affect Chinatown's longtime function as a gateway for immigrants. The concern has also led to a campaign for housing and jobs involving the Chinese Progressive Association, the Chinatown Resident Association, and activists from Right to the City. To tell us about the campaign is our guest from the Chinese Progressive Association, the Programs and Operations Director, Mark Liu. Thank you very much for being with us, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Mark, set the stage and talk about what is happening in Chinatown, because if you go back a decade or so, you have these new high-rise buildings, things came to a stop, and now something's starting up again.
Yeah, exactly. So there is another 2,000 units of luxury or market rate units that are slated to be built in and around near Chinatown. So that's triple the number that exists now. And we're talking about $3,000 a month for a studio or a bedroom, up to $11,000 a month for a penthouse, which is more than most people make in Chinatown. You know, about 70% of Chinatown residents make $35,000 or less. So that's making it very hard for people the working class community in the community, to be able to stay in the community. And as Chinatown has become a more desirable place to live, which we feel like is in part to the efforts that immigrants in the Chinese community has made to better the community, people are having a hard time remaining.
Of course, at the bottom end, as it were, of this gateway function here, you had a building that was in substandard condition, wasn't fit to live in, but now that's being replaced by something that I guess people who were in there before can't live in because they can't afford it, probably.
Yeah, I think that's a good microcosm of what's going on in Chinatown. So last year at 25 Harrison Avenue, tenants were kicked out because basically the building was found unsafe and the fire department evacuated the building. And these are single room occupancy units, shared bathroom, shared kitchen, and they're paying $400, $600 a month because that's what they can afford, and they're still on the waiting list for affordable housing. Fast forward to now, a year later, there was a proposal from a young developer to buy the building to create luxury micro units, 200 square feet. That his target audience is students and young professionals who want to be near Tufts Medical Center or be near downtown, and that's $1,400 a month, which is more than twice or triple what people were paying before. And so I think that's kind of what we're seeing the market go to, and I think what we're saying is actually we feel like there's a responsibility and we need to do something more as a community, as a city, and our government needs to do more to try to keep low-income people in the neighborhoods that they help build up and create.
Well, one thing that could happen to Chinatown is what has already happened to the North End. It's not really an immigrant neighborhood anymore, even though it might have some vestiges and some simulacra of that. But what about Chinatown? Because if you can't have that critical mass of people who are really working their way up and who live fairly close there, what is lost?
Yeah, I think you lose it as a neighborhood where residents really thrive. A lot of folks in our community need to be in the neighborhood because a lot of them work in restaurants in the suburbs. They get dropped off 2 a.m. in Chinatown, and then they can't get home if they don't live in Chinatown. And I think you just lose the neighborhood feel. It becomes more of a tourist attraction than an actual neighborhood with people out there. If you go to Chinatown now, you see people playing in the parks from sunup to sundown. And I think, a lot of people who talked about even before the highway was built to the Chinatown that, it's a neighborhood where people felt safe and could grow, raise their kids, and it's a gateway for the new immigrants.
And of course, part of that is the schools in the community that really focus on the local population.
Yeah, and the Quincy School has been a huge institution and resource for the community, along with all the other nonprofits in the neighborhood that people need access to if you're a limited English speaker and you need services or buy your groceries, to be able to access those.
Well, long before the demonstration took place last week, we had a linkage law in the city so that developers have to set aside a certain percentage of units as affordable. There was a resident job policy saying a certain number of residents, people of color and women got construction jobs. But I guess the feeling was you needed something different and maybe something more powerful than that.
Yeah, I think we can. There's such a big boom now and everyone wants to build in Boston. I think this is the opportunity along with the mayoral race. Like a lot of the ideas that you're talking about, linkage, the Boston resident jobs policy came out of exciting mayoral race in 1983 with Mel King and Ray Flynn. So I think this is the point to put out new ideas and propose new things. So we're looking at, some of the things we're pointing out is public land for public good. So, at least having 40 to 50% affordable housing on public land or some other community use, as well as, we're also asking what's going on with the land lease fees that are the BRA is collecting, the Boston Redevelopment Authority. We have a parking lot in Chinatown that Tufts University is renting, and that money could be used towards affordable housing or help stabilize the community. And so I think we need to look at some creative solutions locally to help working class communities stay here.
And I guess over the years we've heard of things that people in Chinatown were hoping would come almost at least as a side effect of new development, a new school building, a new library. So I guess that's still on the table in a way?
Yeah, so we're saying, for us to have a stable community, we also need housing, but also services that serve the community. So Chinatown had a library 60 years ago, which was torn down when the highway was built through the community.
This is the Mass Turnpike, of course, we're talking about.
Yes, or 93. And so our youth have been leading campaigns to get a library back in the community, along with a lot of other community activists. And so we have a location designated. We have a reading room at Oak Terrace, and we're also looking at a permanent location at Parcel 24 that Asian Community Development Corporation is developing. And now what we're asking from the city is we want library services. We want help staffing the location. Chinatown's the only neighborhood without a library. Feel like we are doing our part to try to find a space and create a space, and so now we're asking for staffing for that space.
Part of the demonstration was you went to the Inkblot development, as we now call it. This is the former site of the Boston Herald, and before the Herald was in there, it was a neighborhood.
That's right. And that's what, so Mel King, a longtime neighborhood activist and also mayoral candidate, he used to live there, and he said, that was his home, that was one of his best neighborhoods he's ever lived in. And then they, during urban renewal, they called it a slum, they called it blighted, and that's how they took the land for eminent domain to build the Boston Herald building. And now it's Inkblot, which is, mostly, again, luxury market rate units going for $3,000 a month for one bedroom. And so what we're saying is, what's been done is done, but we want jobs, good jobs, to help rebuild our community and prioritize access for folks from the Chinatown and South End community.
What about the effect on the Main Street in Chinatown? Because when you have this new housing, yes, it's great you have more people, they can be out spending money in the surrounding area, but you've got all these businesses that were the staple of families buying just, food. So imagine, are they feeling pressure?
Yeah, so I think you could see the businesses changing in Chinatown based on what the demographic is. For example, Inkblot, there's a Whole Foods coming in. We just lost a couple of major grocery stores in the middle of Chinatown that was serving that working class community that wants access to affordable groceries, as well as you see new restaurants popping up that are serving a higher end population. So I think if this continues, businesses that can adjust will adjust, but a lot of these mom and pop stores that really have served the immigrant community for decades, I think we would see that we would be losing them.
One thing I do worry about with this new, almost customized idea of linkage is that 30 years ago we were talking about one size fits all. And I think now if each neighborhood comes up with its own version and its own narrative, doesn't it become maybe a bit difficult for a mayor and whoever's running the BRA to work with?
Yeah, I think there's a balance between neighborhood voice and kind of what goes on in the community, but this is something that's affecting all of Boston. I think you see around the affordability issue and around people not feel like they have control over what happens in their community. That, especially in Chinatown, we felt like there's all this luxury development going on. Even if the community opposed it, it doesn't matter, it's going through. So I think, we would want to see some more democratic voice in what goes on, but also, there's a balance, right, between neighborhood and also what goes citywide voice.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
From the Chinese Progressive Association, Mark Liu.